In the heart of Chicago's 15th precinct, a different kind of storm is brewing. Sister Maria Rosario kneels quietly in her holding cell, her weathered rosary beads clicking softly against cold steel bars. The officers who arrested her smirk, believing they found an easy mark to pad their arrest quotas. They couldn't be more wrong. What they see as a harmless elderly nun in a habit is about to become their department's biggest nightmare. Within hours, an unprecedented call from Rome will shatter their complacency. The Vatican's most formidable legal team is already en route, armed with diplomatic immunity and centuries of canonical law. This isn't just a story about justice, it's about how the most powerful religious institution on earth reminded a corrupt police department that true authority doesn't come from a badge. The photograph sat in a simple wooden frame on Sister Maria's desk at St. Catherine's Shelter for the Homeless. In it, a young woman in graduation regalia beamed at the camera, her medical degree from Northwestern University held proudly before her. That was 30 years ago, before Maria Rosario traded her white coat for a habit, before she discovered that healing took many forms. "Sister, you got any more of those blankets?" Tommy, one of the shelter's regulars, stood in her office. Doorway, shoulders hunched against the Chicago winter that seeped through the old building's walls. "In the supply closet, Tommy. Take two. It's going to be cold tonight." She smiled, noting how he'd maintained his sobriety for 3 months now. Small victories, that's what her work was about. The shelter occupied a former warehouse in a neighborhood the city had seemingly forgotten. Sister Maria had transformed it into a sanctuary, a place where Chicago's forgotten could find not just warmth and food, but dignity. Medical supplies filled one corner of her office, remnants of her first calling now serving her second. Outside her window, Officer James Murphy's patrol car crawled past for the 3rd time that morning. His presence had become more frequent. Lately, ever since the shelter's success had begun drawing attention to the neighborhood's problems, success that made certain people uncomfortable. Sister Maria checked her watch. Almost time for morning medications. Several shelter residents had prescriptions they needed help managing. She'd just opened her medication log when heavy boots echoed in the hallway. "Sister Maria Rosario." Officer Murphy's voice carried that false sweetness she'd learned to recognize. During her years of street ministry, 2 other officers flanked him, their hands resting casually on their weapons. "Yes, Officer Murphy. How can I help you today?" "We've received complaints about illegal drug distribution from this location." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll need to see your dispensing records." Sister Maria met his gaze steadily. "These are private medical records, officer. You'll need a warrant." "A warrant?" Murphy's smile vanished. "Sister, surely you understand we're trying to protect the community, unless you have something to hide." "I understand perfectly, officer. I also understand HIPAA regulations and patient privacy rights. My medical license may have lapsed, but my obligation to protect patient confidentiality has not." Tommy appeared in the doorway behind the officers, clutching his newly acquired blankets. His eyes widened at the scene. "Ma'am, obstruction of justice is a serious offense." Murphy took a step forward. "Even for a nun." Sister Maria remained seated, her hands folded calmly on her desk. "So is harassment, Officer Murphy, and fabricating probable cause. Shall we discuss those as well?" Murphy's face reddened. "Stand up, sister, slowly." James, one of the other officers, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should—" "She's interfering with a narcotics investigation, Peterson. You want that on your record?" Murphy pulled out his handcuffs. "Sister Maria Rosario, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and suspicion of illegal drug distribution." As Murphy roughly cuffed her hands behind her back, Sister Maria noticed Tommy had disappeared. Good. He knew what to do. The shelter had protocols for situations like this. They'd learned the hard way that even a habit didn't guarantee protection from abuse of power. "Officer Murphy?" Sister Maria's voice remained gentle as he led her through the shelter's main room, past shocked residents and volunteers. "I forgive you." Murphy's grip on her arm tightened. "Save it for your lawyer, sister." She smiled slightly. "Oh, I wasn't speaking to you as a defendant, officer. I was speaking as a nun. There's a difference you'll soon understand." As they reached the patrol car, Sister Maria saw Tommy speaking urgently into a phone in the shelter's doorway. The Vatican embassy's number was posted prominently by every shelter phone, another lesson learned from experience. The photograph on her desk watched through the window as they drove away. That young doctor's smile, a reminder of another time, another calling. But Sister Maria felt no regret. God, she had learned, worked in mysterious ways. Sometimes divine intervention wore a doctor's coat, sometimes a habit, and sometimes, she thought, as Murphy's radio crackled with the first confused reports from dispatch, it wore a Vatican legal team's impeccably tailored suits. The body camera footage would later become evidence item A147. It began, as most tragedies do, with something mundane. Officer James Murphy adjusting his vest-mounted camera at the start of his shift. Testing. Body cam active. October 15th, 0600 hours. The footage captured his dashboard computer screen, a complaint report filed anonymously the previous night. Allegations of narcotic distribution at St. Catherine's Shelter, no supporting evidence provided. Dispatch, Unit 15 Adam, responding to follow-up at 1123 West Harrison. Murphy's partner, Officer Peterson, shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat. "James, you sure about this? Sister Maria's got friends at City Hall." "She's got enemies, too." Murphy's smile reflected in the rearview mirror. "Besides, quotas are quotas." The camera captured their approach to the shelter. Early morning light cast long shadows across the building's weathered facade. A line had already formed outside, Chicago's homeless waiting for breakfast service to begin. Inside, Sister Maria moved through her morning routine. The body camera recorded her calm efficiency as she checked medication logs, prepared insulin syringes for their diabetic residents, organized prescription bottles with clear labels and precise documentation. "Sister," Murphy's voice carried artificial warmth, "we've had some concerns." The footage showed her looking up, recognition flickering across her face. Not fear, something else. Disappointment, perhaps. "May I help you, officers?" Anonymous. "In tip about drug distribution. We'll need to see your records." The camera captured her measured response, the quiet strength in her refusal. It recorded Murphy's escalating demands, his growing frustration with her calm citations of patient privacy laws and constitutional rights. What the camera didn't capture, couldn't capture, was the weight of history in that moment. The decades of similar confrontations, different badges, but the same abuse of power. The shelter's walls had seen it all before. "Last chance, sister, show us the records or this gets ugly." Her response was clear in the footage. "Officer Murphy, I cannot violate my patient's rights. If you have probable cause, return with a warrant. Otherwise, I must ask you to leave." The camera shook as Murphy stepped forward. "Wrong answer." Peterson's voice off camera. "James, wait." But Murphy was already reaching for his handcuffs. The footage showed Sister Maria remaining perfectly still as he roughly secured her hands behind her back, her rosary beads clicking softly against the metal. "You have the right to remain silent," Murphy began, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "I know my rights, officer," Sister Maria interrupted gently. "I also know yours, and their limits." The camera caught the flash of anger across Murphy's face as he tightened the cuffs. "Resisting arrest now, too." "No, officer. Bearing witness." The footage tracked their path through the shelter's main room. Residents and volunteers watched in stunned silence. Near the door, Tommy spoke urgently into a phone, his free hand clutching a worn business card with the Vatican embassy's seal. Outside, morning traffic slowed as passers-by recorded the scene on their phones. Sister Maria's habit stood out starkly against the patrol car's black and white paint. "Still feeling righteous, sister?" Murphy asked as he opened the car door. The camera caught her peaceful smile. "Always, Officer Murphy, though I suspect that word means something very different to each of us." As they drove toward the precinct, the body camera recorded Sister Maria's quiet prayers, her lips moving, in familiar patterns. Murphy's attempts to interrupt, to assert his authority, seemed to bounce off an invisible shield of serenity. What the footage couldn't show was the ripple effect already beginning. Tommy's call reaching the Vatican embassy, cell phone videos of the arrest uploading to social media, the first urgent messages landing in diplomatic inboxes an ocean away. The camera's final clear image before entering the precinct, Sister Maria's reflection in the rearview mirror, her eyes closed in prayer, but her spine straight with dignity. The last audio, Murphy's radio crackling with an urgent message from dispatch, something about calls from federal officials. The footage ended there. But the story was just beginning. The internal memo sat in Captain Sarah Chen's inbox, its bureaucratic language masking darker implications. Chicago Police Department, 15th Precinct Internal Memorandum, Performance Metrics and Quota Implementation. Officers failing to meet minimum monthly arrest quotas will be subject to administrative review. Chen pushed back from her desk, the ghost of her father's voice echoing in her mind. "The system only changes from within, Sarah. 20 years on the force, and she was still trying to prove him right." "Captain," her assistant hovered in the doorway, "you need to see this." The holding cell video feed showed Sister Maria sitting serenely on a metal bench, her rosary beads moving steadily through weathered fingers. Murphy stood at the booking desk, his report a masterpiece of creative writing. "Get me Murphy's file and call Internal Affairs." "Already here." Lieutenant Rivera from IA appeared behind the assistant. "This isn't Murphy's first creative arrest, but it might be his last." Chen's computer chimed with an incoming email. Subject line, "Urgent, Vatican Diplomatic Corps." "It's about to get complicated, isn't it?" Rivera asked. "It was always complicated." Chen pulled up Murphy's personnel. File, 16 complaints of excessive force, 23 questionable arrests, all dismissed or buried in bureaucratic limbo. We just couldn't see it. The precinct buzzed with unusual activity. Officers clustered around desks. Phones rang with increasing urgency, and through it all, Sister Maria's quiet prayers echoed from the holding area. "What's her status?" Chen asked. "Still refusing legal representation," Rivera reported. "Says she's waiting for her team." "Her team?" As if in answer, the precinct doors swung open. 3 figures entered, 2 in immaculate suits, flanking an elderly Monsignor in traditional clerical attire. The Vatican's diplomatic credentials gleamed under fluorescent lights. "Captain Chen?" The Monsignor's accent was pure Roman elegance. "I am Monsignor Giuseppe Romano. We're here about Sister Maria Rosario." Murphy appeared from the booking area, his face flushed. "Captain, you can't seriously—" "Officer Murphy," Chen's voice cut like steel. "My office." Now, inside her office, Chen studied Murphy across her desk. The memo about quotas glared from her computer screen. "Explain to me," she said quietly, "why you arrested a nun without a warrant based on an anonymous tip in violation of at least 3 departmental procedures." "Captain, that shelter is a front for what exactly? Helping the homeless? Providing medical care? Or did it just make your quota numbers look bad?" Murphy's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what it's like out there." "No." Chen stood, her father's badge hanging heavy on her chest. "My father walked that same beat for 30 years. Never once needed quotas to do what's right." Through her office window, she watched the Vatican legal team reviewing Sister Maria's arrest report. Their expressions suggested an approaching storm. "We're done here," Chen decided. "Badge and gun on my desk. You're suspended pending investigation." "You can't." "I can. I should have done it months ago." She pressed a button on her desk phone. Send in Lieutenant Rivera. As Murphy was escorted out, Chen returned to the holding area. Sister Maria looked up from her prayers. Captain Chen, she smiled. God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? I'm sorry about this, sister. Don't be. Sometimes it takes a small injustice to expose a larger one. Sister Maria's eyes were kind but knowing. Your father would be proud. Chen startled. How did you? I knew Michael Chen. He brought people to our shelter sometimes when they needed help more than handcuffs. She held up her rosary beads. He understood what real justice looks like. The Vatican legal team approached, led by Monsignor Romano. Behind them, phones continued ringing as news of the arrests spread. Captain! Romano's smile was diplomatic, but firm. Shall we discuss how to proceed? Chen looked at the memo on her desk, then at Sister Maria's serene face. Sometimes, she realized, change came from unexpected directions. Yes, she said, I believe we shall. Diplomatic cable, urgent from Vatican Secretary of State to Apostolic Nunciature United States, RE, Sister Maria Rosario, immediate action required. The cable had arrived at the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C. within minutes of Tommy's e-call. Now Monsignor Romano held a copy as he faced Captain Chen across the conference room table. The Holy See takes the protection of its religious servants very seriously, Captain. His tone was gentle, but carried the weight of centuries of ecclesiastical authority, particularly when they are targeted for their work with the vulnerable. Captain Chen studied the diplomatic document before her. Behind the formal language lay an unmistakable message. The full force of Vatican diplomacy was now focused on the 15th precinct. Sister Maria's work at St. Catherine's is well known to us, Romano continued. Her shelter serves as a model for faith-based community outreach across 3 continents. Through the conference room windows, they could see Sister Maria still in her cell, now surrounded by concerned shelter residents who had gathered outside the precinct. Someone had brought her prayer book. The charges are baseless, Chen admitted, but I'm concerned about the broader implications. Officer Murphy isn't an isolated case. No, Romano agreed. He is, as you Americans say, the tip of the iceberg. He produced another document. Our legal team has identified 37 similar incidents in your precinct over the past 18 months, all involving vulnerable populations, all mysteriously dismissed. Chen's face tightened. The quota system creates incentives for abuse, yes. Romano's eyes were kind but firm. Sister Maria understands this. It's why she hasn't simply accepted release and gone home. She sees an opportunity for, shall we say, divine intervention in earthly matters. In the holding area, Sister Maria had begun leading her impromptu congregation in prayer. The sound drifted through the precinct, creating a surreal atmosphere, as officers tried to maintain business as usual. What exactly does the Vatican want? Chen asked. Justice, Captain, but not merely punitive. Sister Maria has been quite clear about that, Romano smiled. She believes in transformation, not condemnation. Chen's phone buzzed. The mayor's office. Again, outside, news vans were beginning to arrive. We have a proposed framework, Romano continued, producing more documents. Comprehensive departmental reform, with oversight from both ecclesiastical and civil authorities. A chance to make your precinct a model for change. And if we refuse, then things become less collaborative. Romano's smile remained gentle. The Vatican's legal team is quite experienced in matters of international law, and Sister Maria's arrest has already drawn the attention of several human rights organizations. In her cell, Sister Maria had moved on to leading the Our Father. Officers walking past found themselves unconsciously making the sign of the cross. There's something you should know, Chen said, about Officer Murphy, about why this precinct operates the way it does. Ah, Romano nodded. The political connections? The pressure from certain business interests to clean up the neighborhood? The campaign contributions? He patted his briefcase. The Vatican's intelligence services are quite thorough, Captain. Chen felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. After years of fighting the system alone, here finally was an ally with the power to effect real change. What's our next step? First, we release Sister Maria. Then, Romano was interrupted by a commotion outside. Officer Murphy had returned, still in uniform despite his suspension, his face flushed with either drink or rage. "This is my precinct," he shouted, stumbling toward the holding cells. "You can't just—" Before anyone could react, Sister Maria's voice cut through the chaos. "Officer Murphy, come sit with me." The entire precinct froze. Murphy stood swaying, his anger meeting the immovable wall of her compassion. "Come," she repeated softly. "Let's talk about what's really troubling." Romano and Chen exchanged glances. "Perhaps," the Monsignor suggested, "we should give them a moment. Some confessions require privacy." Through the windows, they watched as Murphy slowly, almost against his will, approached Sister Maria's cell. She reached through the bars and took his trembling hand. "Remarkable woman," Romano murmured. "She sees the divine spark even in those who would harm her." "Will this really change anything?" Chen asked. "Captain," Romano smiled, holding up the diplomatic cable. "It already has." The Cardinal's letter bore the personal seal of the Vatican Secretary of State, its handwritten Italian elegant but firm. In matters of justice, the Church must be both sword and shield. Protect Sister Maria, but remember, she seeks reformation, not retribution. Dr. Isabella Romano, the Monsignor's niece and the Vatican's lead civil rights attorney, placed the letter carefully in her briefcase as she surveyed the growing media circus outside the 15th precinct. "They're calling her the Steel Magnolia in a habit," her assistant reported, scrolling through social media updates. "The footage of her arrest has gone viral." "Sister Maria would hate that title," Isabella smiled. She watched as another news van pulled up, though perhaps God has a sense of humor. Inside, the precinct's main conference room had been transformed into a war room. Vatican legal documents covered one wall, police records another. The Church's legal team, 3 attorneys, 2 canon law experts and a human rights specialist, worked with quiet efficiency. Dr. Romano, a young officer, appeared at the door. "The police union representatives are here." Isabella straightened her suit jacket. "Show them in." The union lawyers entered with the confidence of men accustomed to winning. Their swagger lasted exactly 3 minutes into the meeting. "This is unprecedented," Union Counsel James Patterson protested, mopping his brow. "You can't seriously expect—" "On the contrary," Isabella interrupted smoothly, "we have precedent dating back to the Lateran Treaty. Would you like to review the relevant cases?" She gestured to a stack of leather-bound volumes. "The original Latin is quite fascinating. This is a local police matter involving a servant of the Holy See engaged in its charitable mission," Isabella finished, "making it, by definition, an international incident." She pulled out another document. "Unless you'd prefer to discuss this before the International Court of Justice?" In her cell, Sister Maria had finally agreed to a brief rest. Murphy sat on a bench nearby, his earlier bravado replaced by something approaching contemplation. "They're going to make an example of me," he said quietly. "No," Sister Maria replied, eyes still closed. "They're going to help you become an example." The Monsignor entered the conference room, his presence immediately commanding attention. "The Cardinal's office has been quite clear," he addressed the union lawyers. "This is an opportunity for mutual benefit." "Mutual?" Patterson scoffed. "You're threatening to dismantle our entire department." "We prefer the term reform," Isabella interjected. "Though if you'd like to discuss dismantling, I have some fascinating briefs regarding the legal dissolution of public institutions under international law." Captain Chen watched from the doorway, admiring the choreography of it all. The Vatican team moved with the precision of a ballet, each member playing their role perfectly. "What exactly does Sister Maria want?" Patterson demanded. "Justice," the Monsignor replied simply. But perhaps not the kind you're thinking of. Isabella opened another file. We have here a comprehensive reform proposal. New training protocols, community oversight, elimination of quota systems. She smiled. Sister Maria helped draft it between her prayers. She what? Patterson stared. Did you think she spent 30 years running a shelter without learning how systems work? Isabella's smile remained pleasant. She has 3 degrees, including a doctorate in public policy she completed after taking her vows. She's been preparing for this moment for years. The union lawyers huddled in whispered consultation. Through the windows, they could see more media arriving, and now protesters with signs supporting Sister Maria. We need time to review this, Patterson said finally. Of course, Isabella agreed. Though I should mention, the Vatican press office has scheduled a briefing for this evening. I'm sure they'd appreciate having something positive to report. After the union representatives left, Captain Chen approached Isabella. That was divine intervention? Isabella suggested with a small wink. Sometimes God works through canon, law and media pressure. The Monsignor joined them, reading a message on his phone. The Cardinal is pleased with our progress, though he reminds us to ensure Sister Maria's vision of redemption remains our guide. In the holding area, Murphy had begun asking Sister Maria questions about her shelter's work. His voice carried a new note of genuine curiosity. Speaking of redemption, Isabella observed, it seems to be contagious. Faith usually is, the Monsignor replied, especially when backed by excellent legal strategy. Outside, the protesters had begun singing hymns. The sound filtered through the precinct, mixing with the clicking of Sister Maria's rosary beads and the rustling of legal papers that would reshape a broken system. The TikTok video had a simple caption. They arrested our angel. Here's what they don't want you to know. Justice for Sister Maria. The footage, shot by Marcus, a 19-year-old shelter resident, started shaky but powerful. Sister Maria tending to a diabetic elder's wound. Sister Maria breaking up a fight with nothing but quiet words and unwavering presence. Sister Maria sharing her own lunch with a hungry teenager. Then the arrest footage. Her dignity as Murphy cuffed her, her gentle forgiveness, her quiet strength. She saved my life, Marcus's voice narrated. She saves lives every day, and they arrested her for it. 20 million views in 3 hours. In the precinct's makeshift press room, reporters jostled for position. Networks had bumped their regular programming for live coverage. This is Christine Chen for CNN. Live outside Chicago's 15th precinct, where the arrest of a Catholic nun has sparked international outrage and raised questions about police conduct. Inside, Isabella Romano watched the coverage with calculating eyes. The narrative is building nicely. Too nicely, Sister Maria commented from her now open cell. She had refused to leave until certain guarantees were in place. We mustn't let this become about vengeance. Social media disagrees, Isabella's assistant reported. The hashtag #ShameThePrecinct is trending worldwide. Then we change the conversation. Sister Maria stood, straightening her habit. It's time. Captain Chen looked up from her phone. Sister, are you sure? The press out there is hungry for blood, Sister Maria finished, which is precisely why they need to hear a different message. The precinct doors opened. Camera. Flashes exploded. Sister Maria walked out, flanked by the Vatican legal team, but somehow still commanding the entire space. Good evening, her voice carried clearly, halting the shouted questions. I'd like to talk to you about forgiveness. The reporters fell silent. Officer Murphy arrested me because he was trapped in a system that rewards the wrong things. A system that turns protectors into prosecutors, that measures justice in quotas instead of human dignity. Murphy, watching from inside, felt tears he couldn't explain. I forgive him, Sister Maria continued, and I forgive those who built this system. But forgiveness without change is just permission. So yes, we demand reform. Yes, we require accountability, but not to punish, to transform. Isabella stepped forward with prepared statements, but all cameras remained fixed on Sister Maria. My shelter serves people society has forgotten. They don't need more punishment. They need what we all need, a chance to become better than our worst moments. Social media exploded with new hashtags. Ishtastai transform. The 15th, reform with mercy so. I invite Officer Murphy, the police union and city officials to join us. Not in a battle, but in a transformation. The Vatican's legal team has prepared a comprehensive reform proposal. Let's use this moment not to tear down, but to rebuild. Christine Chen thrust a microphone forward. Sister Maria, are you saying you don't want Officer Murphy prosecuted? I want him educated. I want him to spend time at our shelter to learn why we do what we do. I want all officers to understand that true authority comes from serving, not dominating. The Vatican press secretary beamed. This was better than any prepared statement. Inside, Captain Chen watched Murphy watching Sister Maria. His face showed the dawning recognition of a man seeing himself clearly for the first time. The Church stands ready to support comprehensive reform, Isabella added smoothly, both legally and financially. More questions erupted, but Sister Maria raised her hand for silence. Tonight, I return to my shelter. There are people who need care, who need to know that even this situation won't stop us from serving. But tomorrow, she looked directly into the cameras, her gaze somehow reaching through screens to touch millions. Tomorrow, we begin the real work. Together. As she turned to leave, reporters called after her. But Sister Maria was already focused on her next task, her rosary beads clicking softly as she walked. Marcus's video played again on countless screens. She saved my life. She saves lives every day. The hashtags evolved again. Serve like Maria. Be the transformation. Murphy stepped outside, facing the media gauntlet. Sister, he called, I'd like to learn about your shelter, about why. Sister Maria turned back. In that moment, every camera caught it. Her gentle smile, his hesitant step forward, the first reaching toward understanding. The image would become iconic, but more importantly, it would become a beginning. From Captain Sarah Chen's personal investigation notes, pattern emerges. Quota system implemented 18 months ago coincides with 47% increase in questionable arrests. Business associations pushing for neighborhood improvement, mass-coded language. For displacement, follow money trail to campaign contributions. Chen set down her pen and rubbed her temples. The evidence board in her office had grown complex, red strings connecting photos, reports, and financial documents. At the center, Murphy's personnel file, thick with complaints that had mysteriously vanished. Lieutenant Rivera from Internal Affairs studied the board. It goes higher than Murphy, all the way to City Hall, Chen confirmed. Look at these development permits. Every time the shelter helped stabilize the neighborhood, someone pushed back, Rivera finished. Using our officers as muscle. A knock at the door. Officer Peterson, Murphy's former partner, entered hesitantly. Captain, I need to make a statement. Chen gestured to a chair. About Murphy? About everything. Peterson's hands twisted in his lap. The quotas were just the beginning. There's a list, businesses they want cleared out, neighborhoods marked for renewal. The shelter was interfering with their plans. Rivera started recording. Who's they? Downtown Development Coalition. They fund the police union's legal defense fund. When Sister Maria started helping small businesses get grants, helping homeless people find jobs, he swallowed. They told us to solve the problem. Chen added another red string to her board, and Murphy was their willing enforcer. He believed he was helping the neighborhood. We all did at first. Peterson looked down. Sister Maria saw it happening. She kept records of every incident, every displaced person. She was building a case. That's why they moved against her, Rivera realized. She had proof. She has more than proof. Sister Maria's voice made them turn. She stood in the doorway with Isabella Romano holding a thick file. I have witnesses. Every person we helped document their story. Every business owner who was pressured to sell, Isabella smiled. The Vatican's lawyers find it fascinating reading. Chen cleared space on her desk. Show me. The evidence spilled out. Photographs, affidavits, financial records. A pattern of systematic displacement disguised as law enforcement. Murphy was a symptom, Sister Maria said gently. The disease runs deeper. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Rivera asked. People needed to see it themselves. Sometimes the truth needs, she smiled, divine timing. Peterson stood. I'll testify. About everything. Others will follow. Isabella added. We've already received calls from officers in 3 other precincts. Chen studied her evidence board. This could shake the entire department. It needs shaking, Sister Maria said firmly. But remember, the goal isn't to destroy. It's to rebuild. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the office windows, they saw Murphy in civilian clothes talking to a group of officers. Not arguing, teaching. He's explaining about the shelter, Peterson said wonderingly. About what he learned there, Sister Maria nodded. Transformation spreads. Like faith. Chen added the final pieces to her board. Photographs of demolished businesses, displaced families, and at the bottom, a single image of Sister Maria's shelter standing strong. We'll need protection for the witnesses, Rivera noted. The Vatican is offering sanctuary, Isabella replied. Both literal and legal. And the media? Chen asked. We'll receive a very detailed package of evidence, Isabella smiled. Anonymous? Source, of course. Sister Maria touched the evidence board gently. Each string connects a person. Remember that. This isn't about institutions. It's about souls. Chen thought of her father, of his belief in change from within. What do you need from us? Keep documenting, keep testifying. But most importantly, Sister Maria's eyes were kind but determined. Keep your hearts open to those who want to change. Through the window, Murphy had finished speaking. The officers listening to him looked shaken but thoughtful. One was already pulling out his phone, presumably to delete the quota tracking app they'd all been pressured to use. It begins with one person, Sister Maria said softly. Then another, then another. Chen looked at her notes, at the evidence, bored, at the growing group of officers outside choosing transformation over tradition. No, she corrected gently. It began with you. Sister Maria's rosary beads clicked softly. It began with faith. In God, yes, but also in people's capacity to choose better when they know better. The truth of that echoed through the precinct, carried on whispered conversations and newly awakened consciences, spreading like light through darkness, like hope through despair, like transformation through truth. The shelter's guest book lay open on the conference room table, its pages worn with years of testimonials. Officer Murphy sat alone, reading entries Sister Maria had asked him to review. Sister Maria didn't just give me a bed, she gave me back my dignity. Thomas R., United States Army, RET. When nobody would hire me because of my record, she helped me start my own business. Now I employ other shelter residents. Marcus Johnson, MJ's Auto Repair. She saved my children from the streets, saved me from myself. Sarah W. Each page held similar stories, lives transformed, hope restored, humanity affirmed. Murphy's hands trembled as he turned them. The shelter's main room buzzed with activity. News crews interviewed residents while Vatican lawyers took statements. Sister Maria moved through it all like a quiet anchor, ensuring everyone's voice was heard. Officer Murphy? Tommy approached cautiously. Sister Maria asked if you'd like to help serve lunch. Murphy looked up from the guest book. I don't think I'm... She says everyone deserves a chance to serve. Tommy's smile held no bitterness, even those who need forgiveness. In the kitchen, Murphy found himself working alongside people he'd once arrested. They taught him the routine, with surprising patience, how much food to portion, which residents needed special diets, who might need extra encouragement to eat. Maria Williams, a shelter regular, watched him struggle with the serving spoon. Here, she demonstrated the technique. Like this, Sister Maria taught me when I first volunteered. You volunteer here, but I thought that we're all just helpless cases. Her eyes held gentle challenge. Sister Maria taught us that receiving help and giving help can happen at the same time. That's how dignity works. Throughout the shelter, residents shared their stories with investigators, not just about police harassment, but about transformation, about a system of mutual support that Sister Maria had built over decades. She got me into rehab, an elderly man told Isabella Romano, then helped me become a certified addiction counselor. Now I help others. The shelter's more than a place, a young mother explained to Captain Chen. It's a community. When the police started pressuring local businesses to push us out, we organized. Sister Maria showed us how to document everything, how to advocate for ourselves. In his corner, Murphy continued serving lunch. Each interaction a small lesson in humanity. A disabled veteran he'd once cited for loitering showed him how to properly clean the serving trays. A teenager he'd arrested for trespassing taught him the shelter's recycling system. Sister Maria appeared beside him. Learning something? I didn't know, he admitted. About any of this. About them. That was by design, she said quietly. Systems of oppression rely on dehumanization, but systems of transformation, she gestured to the busy shelter, they rely on recognition, of dignity, of potential, of shared humanity. The guestbook's pages continued to speak. Sister Maria taught me that my worst day didn't have to be my whole story. James P. Murphy recognized the handwriting. It was Peterson's. Your partner spent time here, Sister Maria asked. I never knew. Many officers do, when the weight becomes too heavy, when they need reminder of why they chose to serve. She smiled. The shelter welcomes all who seek transformation. As the lunch service wound down, Murphy found himself sitting with Tommy and other shelter residents. They shared stories, not of arrests and quotas, but of struggles and triumphs, of moments when Sister Maria's faith in them had made all the difference. I used to be afraid. When police cars drove by, Tommy admitted. Now, I'm thinking maybe they could be partners instead of threats. Murphy thought of his badge, still sitting on Chen's desk. Do you think that's possible, after everything? Sister Maria thinks so, Tommy shrugged. And she hasn't been wrong yet. In the kitchen, Sister Maria added a new entry to the guest book. Today we witness the beginning of a different kind of transformation, one that reminds us that change is possible, that bridges can be built, that humanity exists on both sides of every divide. Today we served lunch to a man who once served warrants, and in that simple act perhaps lies the seed of real change. The shelter's walls held countless stories. Today they had gained one more. Officer Sarah Martinez stood before Captain Chen's desk, her rookie badge gleaming in her trembling hand. My father wore this badge for 20 years. He taught me it meant something. It still can, Chen replied quietly. Then I want to testify about everything I've seen since joining the force. The precinct had changed in the days since Sister Maria's arrest. What began with Peterson's confession had become a steady stream of officers coming forward, each one carrying their own weight of suppressed conscience. Martinez was the youngest, barely a year out of the academy. Her testimony could be the most damaging and the most hopeful. Tell me, Chen said. They started with small things, pressure to meet quotas, suggestions about which neighborhoods to target. Martinez's voice strengthened. Then they paired us with senior officers who knew how things worked. When I objected, they said I needed to learn the real world. Isabella Romano made notes, while Sister Maria listened from a corner chair, her presence a silent encouragement. The shelter was on their special list, Martinez continued. Murphy told us it was interfering with neighborhood improvement, but I'd done welfare checks there. I'd seen their work. It didn't match what we were being told. Why come forward? Now? Isabella asked. Martinez looked at her badge. Because Sister Maria showed me what real service looks like. And this? She placed the badge on Chen's desk. This should stand for that kind of service. Outside the office, more officers gathered. Word had spread that Martinez was speaking out. Some came to support her, others to witness what felt like a turning point. You understand the risks? Chen asked. Not everyone will appreciate your honesty. Sister Maria risks everything to help people. How can I do less? Sister Maria spoke for the first time. Courage often comes from unexpected sources. The door opened. Murphy entered, still in civilian clothes, carrying a box of files. She's right about the special list. I have copies of everything. Orders, target locations, political pressure. Points. He set the box down. I was wrong about all of it. Martinez stared at her former supervisor. Sir? Don't sir me, Murphy said quietly. I don't deserve it. But maybe we can earn it back, the right way. More officers filtered in, each carrying their own evidence. Incident reports, body camera footage, internal memos, the weight of years of enforced silence lifting with each revelation. It's like a dam breaking, Isabella observed. More like a healing, Sister Maria corrected gently. Truth can hurt, but suppressing it hurts more. Chen surveyed the growing pile of evidence. This goes beyond our precinct. The whole system needs transformation, Sister Maria finished. But transformation starts with truth, with one person brave enough to speak it. Martinez picked up her badge again, studying its reflection. What happens now? Now, Isabella said. We build a case for systematic change, not just legal reform, but cultural transformation. The shelter can help, Murphy offered. They know more about community needs than we ever did. Sister Maria's rosary beads clicked softly. Bridges are built from both sides. Outside, the media remained camped at the precinct doors. But the story had evolved. It wasn't just about one nun's arrest anymore. It was about a system confronting its shadows, about officers choosing conscience over comfort. Your father would be proud, Chen told Martinez. Sister Maria says pride isn't the goal, service is. Murphy nodded. Took me too long to learn that. But you did learn, Sister Maria stood, and that's what matters. Now I believe there are more officers waiting to speak their truth. Shall we listen? Martinez squared her shoulders, badge now back on her uniform. I'll help them. Sometimes you just need to know you're not alone. The precinct hummed with nervous energy as more officers lined up to testify. Each one carried something heavy to set down, a memory, a regret, a chance to begin again. Sister Maria watched them come, her faith in human transformation proven with each new voice raised for change. The ancient leather-bound volume lay open on Isabella Romano's makeshift desk, Corpus Juris Canonici, the body of canon law that had governed church matters since medieval times. Her finger traced a particularly relevant passage about the church's duty to protect those who serve the poor. Fascinating choice of precedent, the police union's lawyer said, studying the text. But surely you're not suggesting that church law supersedes local jurisdiction when it comes to protecting our religious servants? That's exactly what we're suggesting, Isabella smiled. The Vatican's position on this has remained consistent since 1312. Sister Maria sat quietly in the corner, her presence a reminder of why they were all here. The precinct's conference room had become a strange mix of modern legal proceedings and ancient ecclesiastical authority. The Church's interest extends beyond Sister Maria's case, Monsignor Romano added. We're concerned with the systematic targeting of charitable missions. Captain Chen spread out a map marked with red dots. Each point represents a faith-based organization that reported similar pressure. Churches, mosques, synagogues, any group helping the homeless or opposing urban renewal. The pattern is quite clear, Isabella continued. And the Vatican's archives contain similar cases stretching back centuries. The Church has some experience with authorities who prioritize property over people. The union lawyer shifted uncomfortably. This is a local police matter. That became an international incident the moment they arrested a Catholic nun performing her sacred duties. Isabella produced another document. The papal nuncio has already briefed the State Department. Sister Maria's voice cut through the legal maneuvering. We seek justice, not victory. There's a difference. Sister Maria is right, Monsignor Romano said. Our goal is reform, not retribution. The Church offers a partnership in transformation. Murphy, sitting in on the proceedings at Sister Maria's request, spoke up. The shelter's model, it could work for police-community relations too. All eyes turned to him. The former hardline officer advocating for community policing, Sister Maria's influence at work. Exactly, Isabella seized the opening. We're proposing a joint oversight committee, church representatives, police officials, community leaders. Real partnership in protecting and serving. The ancient text seemed to watch over the proceedings, its centuries of wisdom lending weight to modern justice. Sister Maria touched its pages gently. These laws were written to protect the vulnerable, she observed. That hasn't changed, even if the times have. Captain Chen studied the proposal. This goes beyond our precinct. Change often does, Sister Maria replied. When it's real. The union lawyer made a final attempt. The police department can handle its own reform, like it handled accountability? Isabella interrupted smoothly. We have 700 years of case law suggesting otherwise. And current evidence, Chen added, gesturing to the growing pile of officer testimonies. Sister Maria stood, drawing everyone's attention. The Church doesn't seek to rule, but to serve, to help heal what's broken, in people, in systems, in communities. The ancient book's pages rustled as if in agreement. Murphy found himself staring at it, remembering years of enforcing laws without considering their deeper purpose. The shelter, he said suddenly. It doesn't just help people with immediate needs. It helps them rebuild their lives. Maybe that's what real law enforcement should be. Isabella exchanged glances with her uncle. Murphy's transformation was becoming their strongest argument for systemic change. The Church offers its full resources, Monsignor Romano stated. Legal, financial, spiritual, a true partnership in community healing. The union lawyer looked from the ancient text to the modern evidence, from Sister Maria's quiet strength to Murphy's visible transformation. The weight of history and hope hung in the air. We'll need time to review. Time is one thing the Church has in abundance, Isabella smiled. We've been protecting our mission of mercy since before this city existed. We can wait a little longer for you to make the right choice. Sister Maria's rosary beads clicked softly, a gentle counterpoint to the legal discussions. The old books, wisdom merged with new hope, centuries of protecting the vulnerable meeting modern dreams of transformation. Justice and mercy, she said quietly. They've always been meant to work together. The precinct's security cameras captured every moment of what would later be called the turning point. Camera 23, main entrance, 10:47 a.m. Police Commissioner Harrison strode through the doors, flanked by city officials and business leaders from the Downtown Development Coalition. His face carried the confidence of a man accustomed to problems disappearing when he applied enough pressure. Camera 17, Conference Room B, 10:49 a.m. This ends now, Harrison demanded. You're all being played by a nun with a PR team. Sister Maria sat calmly at the conference table, surrounded by her Vatican legal team. Captain Chen stood by the evidence board, Murphy and Martinez flanking her. Played? Isabella Romano's voice was silk over steel. Commissioner, we're just beginning. Camera 12, corridor, 10:50 a.m. Officers gathered outside the conference room, drawn by raised voices. Their faces showed the struggle between old loyalties and new truths. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," the coalition's chairman sputtered. "The development plans, the investments, the displacement of vulnerable communities," Sister Maria suggested quietly. "The abuse of police power for private profit. We understand perfectly. Camera 17, conference room B, 10:52 a.m. Officer Murphy." Harrison turned. "Surely you of all people—" "Show them," Murphy interrupted, his voice steady. He pulled out a phone, pressed play. His own body camera footage filled the room's screen. Harrison's voice: "The quota system stays. Find a way to clear those neighborhoods. I don't care how." Camera 14, hallway security feed, 10:53 a.m. More officers pressed forward, watching through the conference room windows. Martinez's hand rested on her badge. "Ready." "That recording is inadmissible," Harrison's lawyer started. "In criminal court, perhaps," Isabella smiled. "But the Vatican's ecclesiastical courts have different standards. And the court of public opinion? They'll find it fascinating." Camera 17, conference room B, 10:54 a.m. "You're throwing away your careers," Harrison warned the officers. "All of you." "No!" Chen stepped forward. "We're remembering why we chose them." Sister Maria stood, her small frame somehow filling the room. "Commissioner, you're fighting the wrong battle. This isn't about property values. It's about human values." Camera 23, main entrance, 10:55 a.m. The media crews outside pressed closer as shouting echoed through the precinct. Camera 17, conference room B, 10:56 a.m. "This department doesn't belong to you." Harrison's face reddened. "This city doesn't belong to them." He jabbed a finger toward Sister Maria. "Exactly," she replied softly. "It belongs to all of us. That's what you never understood." Murphy moved to stand beside her, then Martinez. Then, one by one, officers filled the room, choosing sides not with violence but with quiet dignity. Camera 12, corridor, 10:57 a.m. Harrison watched his authority dissolve as more officers stepped into the conference room, standing with Sister Maria and Captain Chen. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "Justice," Sister Maria answered. "But justice tempered with transformation, your resignation, independent oversight. Real community policing? Or," Harrison challenged. Isabella held up a thick file. "Or we take everything, the quotas, the corruption, the development deals, to every court that will listen. And Commissioner?" Her smile was razor-sharp. "The Vatican's memory is very, very long." Camera 17, conference room B, 11 a.m. The coalition chairman whispered urgently in Harrison's ear. The commissioner's shoulders sagged, decades of power politics crumbling in a single moment. "You'll regret this," he warned. "No," Sister Maria's voice was gentle. "They'll remember this. The day they chose to serve rather than subjugate." Camera 23, main entrance, 11:02 a.m. Harrison and his entourage pushed through the media scrum, no comment for the hungry cameras. Camera 17, conference room B, 11:03 a.m. Sister Maria surveyed the room full of officers who had chosen conscience over comfort. "Now," she said, "the real work begins." Murphy touched his badge, newly restored by Captain Chen. "We're ready." The security footage ended there, but its impact echoed through the department, the city, and eventually precincts across the country. Sometimes transformation comes with a bang, sometimes with a whisper. That day, it came with the quiet courage of those who chose to stand for what their badges were always meant to represent. The press badges accumulated on Isabella Romano's desk like fallen leaves. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, BBC, Al Jazeera. Each network desperate to interview the nun who had sparked a national conversation about police reform. "Good Morning America wants, you live tomorrow," Isabella told Sister Maria. 60 Minutes is offering a full hour. The New York Times, no. Sister Maria didn't look up from the shelter's medication logs. "The story isn't about me." "With all due respect, Sister," Rivera from Internal Affairs interjected, "it kind of is. The precinct's break room had become a de facto media center. Screens showed continuous coverage. In Chicago, a remarkable transformation as police officers break ranks to support systematic reform. Vatican intervention forces examination of police practices nationwide. Shelter residents speak out about systematic harassment and displacement. It's become a movement, Captain Chen observed, watching the coverage. Other precincts are coming forward. Other cities. Murphy entered, carrying fresh coffee for everyone. The media had labeled him the reformed officer, a title that made him uncomfortable but served a purpose. Philadelphia called, he reported. Their police union wants to discuss voluntary oversight. Detroit, too. Sister Maria finally looked up. And our own officers. Changed, Murphy said simply. You can feel it in the precinct, like everyone's remembering why they first put on the badge. A producer from Reuters pushed through the door. Sister Maria, please, just 5 minutes. Talk to the shelter residents, she directed. Talk to the officers. Talk to the community. They're the story. But the media knew better. The image of a nun armed with nothing but faith and canonical law facing down systemic corruption was too powerful to ignore. The press badges multiplied. Le Monde, Der Spiegel, The Guardian. The Vatican press office is pleased, Isabella noted, though they suggest a papal audience might be. The shelter needs its medications organized, Sister Maria interrupted firmly. The media can wait. Through the windows they watched as Martinez led sensitivity training for her fellow officers, teaching them the shelter's protocols. Former adversaries learning to become allies. CBS is doing a feature on community policing, Chen reported. They're calling it the Sister Maria model. Sister Maria's rosary beads clicked in quiet counterpoint to the media chaos. As long as they understand it's about transformation, not punishment. About building bridges, not walls. Murphy gathered the press badges, reading the names. Each one of these reaches millions. Maybe that's part of God's plan too? Getting the message out? The message is in the work, Sister Maria replied. In officers choosing to protect rather than persecute. In communities learning to trust rather than fear. Another producer appeared, this one from a streaming service. We're thinking documentary series, sister. The whole story from your medical career to talk to Officer Murphy, she directed. He can tell you about real change. The producer turned to Murphy, who found himself sharing the shelter's impact, his own transformation, the ripple effect through the department. Sister Maria slipped out quietly during his testimony. They found her in the shelter's kitchen, helping serve lunch. The media crews followed, cameras capturing the simple dignity of service. You can't hide from this story, Isabella said gently. It's bigger than any of us now. I'm not hiding, Sister Maria corrected. I'm doing what matters. The rest is just noise. But the noise was changing things. Police departments across the country were reaching out. Community organizations were adopting the shelter's methods. Politicians were rediscovering words like accountability and reform. The press badges kept coming. Time, Newsweek, The Atlantic. Each one carrying the story further, deeper into the national consciousness. The Pope sends his personal congratulations, Monsignor Romano announced, reading from a Vatican dispatch. Sister Maria handed a shelter resident an extra serving of vegetables. Tell His Holiness the real congratulations belong to those who chose to change. Now who needs more bread? The cameras rolled, capturing not the story they expected, but the one that needed telling. How real transformation happens not in grand gestures, but in small acts of service, repeated with faith and determination until the world changes, one heart at a time. Chicago Police Department, 15th Precinct Comprehensive Reform Proposal. Draft. 1. The Sister Maria Protocol. The document sat open on the conference room table, its pages filled with annotations from officers, community leaders, and Vatican legal experts. Captain Chen watched as Sister Maria reviewed the latest revisions. Community Oversight Board, Joint Patrol Protocols, Elimination of Quota Systems. Sister Maria nodded slowly. But something's missing. Murphy leaned forward. What? Hope! She picked up a pen. We're not just changing rules, we're changing hearts. The precinct hummed with unusual energy. Officers who had once competed for arrest numbers now collaborated on community outreach plans. The holding cells had been repurposed as meeting spaces for police-community dialogue. The mayor's office is fighting back, Isabella reported, entering with fresh coffee. Budget threats, political pressure. Let them, Chen replied. We've got something stronger than politics. Through the windows they could see Officer Martinez leading a group of cadets through the shelter, learning to see humanity instead of statistics. The reform proposal was already taking root, even before formal adoption. Commissioner Harrison's resignation letter is public, Rivera announced, checking his phone. The media's calling it a systematic revolution in policing. Sister Maria continued reading. Officers will complete 40 hours of community service per quarter at local charitable organizations. That was Murphy's idea, Chen noted. Murphy shrugged. Hard to dehumanize people when you're serving alongside them. The proposal grew as they worked, incorporating lessons from the shelter's decades of community building. Each page represented not just policy changes, but philosophical transformation. The union's still resistant, Isabella warned. Show them the numbers, Chen suggested. Community complaints down 60% since we started the pilot program. Officer. Satisfaction up 45%. Sister Maria added another note to the margin. Remember, every policy must serve human dignity first. The Downtown Development Coalition had withdrawn their aggressive renewal plans, faced with united opposition from a reformed police department and empowered community. Their press release cited changing neighborhood dynamics. They mean they can't bully people anymore, Murphy translated. They mean transformation is contagious, Sister Maria corrected gently. The document's final section detailed oversight mechanisms, joint committees of officers, community members, and faith leaders. Regular reviews, real accountability. It's spreading, Rivera reported. 3 other precincts have requested copies. Of the protocol, 2 more cities want to pilot the program. Sister Maria watched through the window as a patrol officer helped an elderly homeless man with his groceries. No cameras present, no publicity, just simple human kindness, becoming normal. That, she pointed, that's what needs to be in here. Not just rules for actions, but space for humanity to grow. They added a new section, cultural transformation and community integration. The Sister Maria Protocol wasn't just about reform, it was about redemption. The Vatican's officially endorsed the model, Monsignor Romano announced. They're recommending it to Catholic charities worldwide. Murphy studied the document that would reshape his profession. Will it be enough? No, Sister Maria said. Simply, documents don't change things, people do. This is just the framework for the real work. The real work was already visible. Officers learning residents' names, knowing their stories. Community members starting to see badges as symbols of protection rather than threat. Trust growing like tender shoots after winter. The hardest parts are still ahead, Chen acknowledged. Yes, Sister Maria agreed. Change is always hardest when the excitement fades. That's when real transformation happens, in the daily choice to do things differently. The proposal's final page remained blank, waiting for signatures. Not just from officials and administrators, but from officers and community members. A shared commitment to a new way. It's not perfect, Isabella observed. It's not meant to be, Sister Maria replied. It's meant to be alive, to grow as we grow. Through the precinct windows, they could see the city stretching out before them. Not yet transformed, but awakening to possibility. The proposal was just the beginning. The seed of something that could flower in every street, every interaction, every human heart ready for change. From Sister Maria's journal, today I witnessed something remarkable. Officer Murphy, James, as he asks to be called now, led the morning briefing at the shelter. He spoke about dignity, about seeing the divine in every face. His hands still trembled, but his voice was sure. Sometimes God's greatest miracles are the quiet ones, the slow transformation of a human heart. The journal lay open on her simple desk as Sister Maria watched Murphy work with new officers in the shelter's intake area. Each interaction was a small lesson in humanity. "Remember," he told them, "everyone who comes through that door is someone's child, someone's family. That's where we start." Isabella found Sister Maria observing the training. "Your journal entries will be valuable historical documents one day." "They're not for history," Sister Maria smiled. "They're for hope, to remind us that change is possible." Another entry caught the light. "The precinct feels different now. Officers greet our residents by name. They ask about families, health, needs. Captain Chen says complaints are down to nearly zero, but statistics don't capture the real change, the way eyes meet now instead of avoiding, the small kindnesses that have become routine." Martinez entered, excited. "Sister, the Community Council approved our joint patrol program. We'll have shelter residents riding along, helping us understand neighborhood needs better." Murphy looked up from his training. "Like you did for me?" "Exactly," Sister Maria nodded. "Understanding grows from proximity." She turned to a fresh journal page. "Today, Officer Peterson led meditation in the shelter's chapel. Last year, he was writing citations for our residents. Now he teaches them breathing techniques for stress management. The transformation spreads in ways we never expected." The shelter had become a hub of reconciliation. Officers who had once been feared now volunteered regularly. Residents who had hidden from police now helped train cadets in community sensitivity. "The DA's office called," Isabella reported. "They're implementing new prosecution guidelines based on our model. Treatment over punishment where appropriate." Sister Maria added to her journal, "The miracle isn't just in changed policies, but in changed perceptions. Both sides seeing humanity in each other, the walls between us and them dissolving in shared service." Murphy gathered his trainees. For their next lesson, they sat in a circle with shelter residents, sharing stories, finding common ground. The badges and uniforms seemed less like barriers now, more like symbols of shared responsibility. "I spent so many years doing it wrong," Murphy admitted to the group, "thinking authority came from force. And now," Sister Maria asked softly, "now I understand it comes from service, from seeing people as people, not problems." She wrote, "James Murphy's transformation reminds me of the Bible's most powerful stories. Not the miracles of instant change, but the deeper miracles of gradual awakening. The slow opening of eyes that had been closed, hearts that had been hardened." The day continued with its small reconciliations. A former addict helped an officer understand addiction's grip. An officer taught self-defense to shelter residents, but with an emphasis on de-escalation and dignity. "It's not what I expected," Chen admitted, watching the interactions. "When we started this reform, I thought it would be about rules and oversight." "Rules without relationship breed rebellion," Sister Maria replied. "Relationship without rules breeds chaos. We need both." Her journal captured the moment. Today, Captain Chen said something profound about balance. Like so many things in God's creation, justice works best when mercy walks beside it. Our shelter has become a place where both can flourish. As evening approached, Murphy gathered his things to leave. He paused at Sister Maria's desk. "I never properly thanked you," he said, "for seeing something in me worth saving." "God sees it in all of us," she replied. "Some just need help remembering." She made one final entry. "Tonight, James Murphy thanked me for his transformation. But the truth is, his change belongs to him, to his courage in choosing a different path, his willingness to face what he had been and imagine what he could become. My role was simply to hold up a mirror that reflected not just what was, but what could be. In the end, that's what reconciliation really means. Not forgetting, the past but refusing to let it define the future. From Sister Maria's journal, today I witnessed something remarkable. Officer Murphy, James, as he asks to be called now, led the morning briefing at the shelter. He spoke about dignity, about seeing the divine in every face. His hands still trembled, but his voice was sure. Sometimes God's greatest miracles are the quiet ones, the slow transformation of a human heart. The journal lay open on her simple desk as Sister Maria watched Murphy work with new officers in the shelter's intake area. Each interaction was a small lesson in humanity. Remember, he told them, everyone who comes through that door is someone's child, someone's family. That's where we start. Isabella found Sister Maria observing the training. Your journal entries will be valuable historical documents one day. They're not for history, Sister Maria smiled. They're for hope, to remind us that change is possible. Another entry caught the light. The precinct feels different now. Officers greet our residents by name. They ask about families, health, needs. Captain Chen says complaints are down to nearly zero, but statistics don't capture the real change, the way eyes meet now instead of avoiding, the small kindnesses that have become routine. Martinez entered, excited. Sister, the community council approved our joint patrol program. We'll have shelter residents riding along, helping us understand neighborhood needs better. Murphy looked up from his training. Like you did for me? Exactly, Sister Maria nodded. Understanding grows from proximity. She turned to a fresh journal page. Today, Officer Peterson led meditation in the shelter's chapel. Last year, he was writing citations for our residents. Now he teaches them breathing techniques for stress management. The transformation spreads in ways we never expected. The shelter had become a hub of reconciliation. Officers who had once been feared now volunteered regularly. Residents who had hidden from police now helped train cadets in community sensitivity. The DA's office called, Isabella reported. They're implementing new prosecution guidelines based on our model. Treatment over punishment where appropriate. Sister Maria added to her journal, the miracle isn't just in changed policies, but in changed perceptions. Both sides seeing humanity in each other, the walls between us and them dissolving in shared service. Murphy gathered his trainees. For their next lesson, they sat in a circle with shelter residents, sharing stories, finding common ground. The badges and uniforms seemed less like barriers now, more like symbols of shared responsibility. I spent so many years doing it wrong, Murphy admitted to the group, thinking authority came from force. And now, Sister Maria asked softly, now I understand it comes from service, from seeing people as people, not problems. She wrote, James Murphy's transformation reminds me of the Bible's most powerful stories. Not the miracles of instant change, but the deeper miracles of gradual awakening. The slow opening of eyes that had been closed, hearts that had been hardened. The day continued with its small reconciliations. A former addict helped an officer understand addiction's grip. An officer taught self-defense to shelter residents, but with an emphasis on de-escalation and dignity. It's not what I expected, Chen admitted, watching the interactions. When we started this reform, I thought it would be about rules and oversight. Rules without relationship breed rebellion, Sister Maria replied. Relationship without rules breeds chaos. We need both. Her journal captured the moment. Today, Captain Chen said something profound about balance. Like so many things in God's creation, justice works best when mercy walks beside it. Our shelter has become a place where both can flourish. As evening approached, Murphy gathered his things to leave. He paused at Sister Maria's desk. I never properly thanked you, he said, for seeing something in me worth saving. God sees it in all of us, she replied. Some just need help remembering. She made one final entry. Tonight, James Murphy thanked me for his transformation. But the truth is, his change belongs to him, to his courage in choosing a different path, his willingness to face what he had been and imagine what he could become. My role was simply to hold up a mirror that reflected not just what was, but what could be. In the end, that's what reconciliation really means. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it define the future. Chicago Police Department, 15th Precinct Policy Manual, Section 1, Community First Policing. All interactions begin with the recognition of human dignity. The new policy manual's pages weren't just regulations, they were a revolution in progress. Captain Chen watched officers studying it during their morning briefing, noting how they lingered over sections that would have seemed radical just months ago. Remember, Martinez told her fellow officers, every person we encounter is part of our community first, a potential case second. The manual's innovations had drawn national attention. Departments across the country requested copies, studied. Its integration of community participation, marveled at its emphasis on prevention over punishment. Seattle's implementing our crisis response protocols, Chen reported to Sister Maria. Detroit wants our community oversight framework. Sister Maria studied a training session through the precinct windows. Murphy was teaching de-escalation techniques, but with a twist. Shelter residents participated, sharing their perspectives on what made them feel safe or threatened. The manual means nothing without the mission, she observed, and the mission is transformation, not just regulation. The changes were visible everywhere. Holding cells repurposed as community meeting rooms, officers attending neighborhood council meetings not to monitor but to listen. Weekly joint sessions where residents and police planned initiatives together. Complaints down 80%, Rivera noted, reviewing the latest statistics. Community trust metrics at historic highs. The manual's most revolutionary section detailed the Sister Maria Protocol for officer community integration, regular service shifts at local organizations, ongoing cultural competency training, partnership with social services. Los Angeles called again, Isabella mentioned. Their police commission wants to understand how we managed the transition. Show them this, Murphy suggested, gesturing to the scene outside. A new officer was helping an elderly shelter resident with her shopping bags, not because the manual required it, but because it had become natural. The transformation wasn't just in policies, it was in daily habits, small kindnesses, reformed instincts. It's becoming muscle memory, Chen observed. That's how real change works, Sister Maria nodded. Not through force, but through practice, until new ways become natural ways. The manual's pages contained other innovations. Mental health response, teams, addiction specialists on call, community mediators for neighborhood disputes. Each policy grown from experience, tested in reality, refined by results. The mayor's office is calling it the Chicago model, Isabella reported. No, Sister Maria corrected gently. It's the human model. We're just remembering what we knew all along. That service is stronger than force. Murphy gathered his trainees for their afternoon community walk. Once these had been shows of force, now they were listening tours, relationship-building exercises, opportunities for connection. The manual's good, he told them, but the people are better teachers. Learn their names, know their stories. That's real community policing. The transformation spread in unexpected ways. Other city departments studied the manual, adapting its principles. Schools implemented its conflict resolution strategies. Businesses adopted its community engagement frameworks. It's like watching a garden grow, Sister Maria said, observing the daily interactions, each small change feeding the next. The manual's final section was uniquely innovative. Blank pages for ongoing community input, regular revisions based on learned experience, space for evolution. Because transformation never really ends, Chen explained to visiting officials. It grows as we grow. Through it all, Sister Maria's shelter remained the heart of the change. Officers who had once been enemies now served meals, taught classes. learned and grew alongside residents. The boundaries between protector and protected blurred in shared humanity. "The manual's just the beginning," Murphy told his trainees. "The real policy is written in every interaction, every choice to see people as people." Sister Maria watched it all, her rosary beads clicking softly as she prayed. Not for more rules or regulations, but for the continuation of this quiet miracle. Hearts opening, minds changing, humanity recognizing itself in unexpected faces. "The true transformation," she wrote in the manual's community input section, "is not in the words on these pages, but in the actions they inspire and the relationships they nurture. May we never stop growing toward the light of our better natures." Congressional testimony, Transcript House Committee on Police Reform, witness, Sister Maria Rosario. "The transformation of one precinct can become the transformation of a nation." The marble halls of Congress felt far from her shelter's humble walls. But Sister Maria's quiet dignity remained unchanged. She sat before the committee, her weathered rosary beads resting beside the microphone. "Sister Maria," the committee chair began, "your model of police reform has drawn national attention. Tell us how it began." "It began with recognition," she replied, "not of problems, but of possibilities, of the humanity in every person, even those who seem to stand against us." Murphy sat in the gallery, now a sought-after speaker on police reform. Behind him, rows of officers from across the country listened intently, notebooks open, badges gleaming. "The numbers are remarkable," another representative noted. "Complaints down, community trust up, crime rates falling. How?" "Numbers don't tell the whole story," Sister Maria said. "The real change is in relationships. When officers know residents' names, their stories, their struggles, when they serve alongside them, policing becomes community care." Captain Chen presented the statistical evidence. 30 cities now implementing the Sister Maria protocol, hundreds of departments studying the model, thousands of officers trained in the new approach. "But statistics aren't transformations," Sister Maria reminded them. "Those happen one heart at a time." The testimony continued, but the real evidence was in the gallery. Officers who had once been skeptics now sat beside community activists they had once confronted. Former adversaries united in a new vision of public safety. "Tell us about Officer Murphy," a representative requested. Sister Maria smiled. "Ask him yourself. His transformation speaks louder than my words." Murphy approached the microphone, his bearing now that of a teacher rather than an enforcer. He spoke of change, of awakening, of finding true purpose in service rather than force. "Sister Maria didn't just change our policies," he testified. "She changed our perspective. We learned to see the divine in every face, even those we once deemed problems." In the back of the gallery, Isabella Romano watched with satisfaction. The Vatican's influence had helped spark the change, but the flame now burned on its own. "The shelter remains our model," Murphy continued, "not just for what it does, but for how it does it. With dignity, with respect, with the understanding that every person has value." Sister Maria's testimony turned to practical matters: funding for community programs, training reforms, integration of social services. But underneath the policy recommendations ran a deeper current, the transformation of hearts. "Other countries are studying your model," another representative noted. "What makes it universally applicable?" "Human dignity is universal, Sister," Maria replied simply. "The need for respect, for understanding, for belonging, these cross all borders." The committee members leaned forward as she described the daily reality: officers volunteering at shelters, residents helping train cadets, communities and police working together to solve problems before they became crimes. "It's not just about reform," she emphasized. "It's about remembering why we serve, who we serve, and how we serve." From the gallery, Captain Chen watched her old precinct's transformation become a national template. Other captains sought her advice now, eager to understand how deep change takes root. The hardest part, Chen testified, is trusting the process. Real transformation takes time, patience and faith in people's capacity to change. As the hearing concluded, Sister Maria offered a final thought. We speak of law enforcement, but perhaps we should speak of community enforcement, the strengthening of bonds that make laws less necessary. When we serve together, we need fewer rules to govern us. Outside the hearing room, officers from across the country waited to speak with her. Each carried stories of departments beginning their own transformations, of barriers breaking down, of communities healing. "You've started a movement," Isabella observed. "No," Sister Maria corrected gently. "We've remembered a truth. That service to others is the highest form of protection. Everything else follows from that." The transcript would become required reading at police academies nationwide, but its true impact wasn't in its words. It was in the quiet revolution spreading through precincts and communities across the country, one transformed heart at a time. The dedication plaque shone in the morning sun. Sister Maria Rosario Community Policing Center, where service meets protection, dedicated to the transformation of hearts and the strengthening of community Est. 2025. Sister Maria touched the plaque. Gently, remembering the holding cell where this journey began, the old precinct building had been transformed, its walls now housing both police operations and community services. "Still think we got the wording wrong," Murphy said, adjusting his training director badge. "Should have mentioned your arrest." "The past informs us," she replied, "but it doesn't define us." The center buzzed with activity. In one room, officers and social workers coordinated responses to community needs. In another, residents attended a citizen police academy, learning about law enforcement from the inside. The holding cells had become counseling rooms, the booking area a welcome center. 4 more cities breaking ground on similar centers, Isabella reported, reviewing updates on her phone. The Vatican's providing matching funds. Captain Chen, now Superintendent Chen, surveyed the morning briefing where officers and community members planned the day's initiatives together. "Remember when this was all just a dream?" "It was never just a dream," Sister Maria corrected. "It was a possibility waiting to be born." The shelter remained next door, connected by more than just proximity. Officers routinely volunteered there, while shelter residents helped train new recruits in community sensitivity. The boundaries between serving and being served had blurred into shared purpose. Martinez, now a lieutenant, led a group of trainees through the center's halls. "Everything we do begins with dignity," she told them. "Sister Maria taught us that." The morning sun caught the cross on Sister Maria's habit as she watched young officers learning from former adversaries, shelter residents sharing wisdom with rookie cops, barriers dissolving in shared service. "The transformation continues," she observed quietly. Murphy gathered his latest training class, officers from departments across the country, eager to learn the model that had begun with one nun's arrest. "It starts with seeing," he told them, "really seeing each person you serve." Through the center's windows, the city stretched out before them. Not perfect, but better. Streets where badges now meant protection rather than threat. Communities where trust grew stronger each day. Sister Maria's rosary beads clicked softly as she blessed the day beginning around her. The miracle wasn't in the building or the programs or even the changes they'd achieved. It was in the daily choice to serve, to protect, to transform. "Your arrest changed everything," Chen said softly. "No," Sister Maria smiled. "Love changed everything. The arrest just opened the door." Outside, the morning shift began. Officers heading out not to enforce, but to serve, carrying in their hearts the lesson that had started with one nun's quiet dignity in a holding cell. The plaque caught the sunlight, a reminder that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the smallest acts of courage, of faith, of unwavering belief in human dignity. And in her shelter next door, Sister Maria's empty desk held a small sign, written in her careful hand, Gone to serve. Join me. They had, they would, they will.